Did you know that the D's in D&D actually stand for dice? And even if that is a bit of a weird and untrue statement, it may as well be a fact because you're going to see dice a lot more than you will any dungeon or dragon. So let's grab our resin cast polyhedral crack and have a chat about the best thing in Dungeons and Dragons, dice. Hi there, I'm just a second level fighter who likes talking about D&D, and if you'd like to see more content like this or any of the other videos on my channel, then you should consider hitting the subscribe button. But enough about that, because today we're talking about dice. Right, so these geometric gems that pretty much all D&D players covet are used as the main tool of arbitration within the game when there is any level of uncertainty. In other words, when we don't know what the outcome of a specific course of action is, and we want a decently random way of determining said outcome, we roll dice. In D&D specifically, we generally use a set of 7 dice, each with a differing number of faces. We use the shorthand names D4, D6, D20, etc., where the number that comes after the D represents the number of sides. Now, dice are wonderful. They are a physical treasure that can be collected outside of the game, and oh boy, do people collect them. The urge to hoard them can be intense, fueled by the myriad different colors, patterns, and even shapes. Are you a dice goblin with a modest but slowly expanding collection, or a dice dragon with an overwhelming trove of polyhedral wealth? Regardless, dice bring joy both in and out of our fantasy worlds, and we're going to discuss each and every individual one. If you're the type to absent-mindedly build a tower, don't worry, so am I. So, go ahead, stack a few while watching or listening, but always remember, don't eat them. Real quick, let's just touch on 2 honorable mentions. The hypothetical D2 and D3. Now, these dice do actually exist, but they look a bit weird. However, when actually playing, we usually use other dice to simulate the same effect. A D2 is never specifically called out in the rules of D&D, but there are effects that occur on an odd or even die roll, or when you use an equal upper and lower range, basically a 50-50 roll or a coin toss. As for a D3, this one is actually called out. Most notably, the Wild Magic Barbarian can use their Bolstering Magic feature to restore a spell slot to a creature. The level of spell slot is determined by rolling a D3, something that the vast majority of D&D players don't actually have. So instead, just roll a D6 or D12 and split the roll up into 3 equal ranges. Moving on, we have the die that most resembles an implement of pain. The D4 is a tetrahedron, which means it has 4 sides and a 25% chance of landing on any given face. Rolling one of these bad boys gives you an average result of 2.5, and considering the tiny range of 1 to 4, this makes it the most consistent die in your arsenal. As mentioned, these things look nasty, and trust me, they can cause some serious harm if you misplace them, forget about them, and then happen to stand on them. We're talking pain comparable or even worse than Lego bricks. They may deal the least damage in-game, but they deal the most damage in the real world. Within the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, D4s are used as damage dice for daggers, clubs, light hammers, sickles, whips, darts, slings, and the extremely rare and often overlooked double-bladed scimitar, which interestingly enough deals 2d4 damage and is therefore the single most consistently rolling weapon in the entire game. Very cool to pull out at a session when nobody knows it even exists. Apart from that, D4s are often used with spells that deal persistent acid damage like Tasha's Caustic Brew, Melf's Acid Arrow, and Vitriolic Sphere. However, this is a very loose rule as Acid Splash, a spell with acid literally in its name, uses D6s instead. A few other popular spells that use D4s are Magic Missile, Cloud of Daggers, and the Cheese Grater itself, Spike Growth. Now, there are a few features and effects that add or subtract minor amounts to D20 tests such as the Bane, Bless, or Guidance spells. The D4 is mainly used here due to how consistent it is. One tiny nugget of wisdom, if you're a DM and you like to homebrew stuff, be careful with using a bunch of D4s for an attack or effect. You are definitely going to roll pretty close to the average number, and if you happen to forget that and add too many dice because you thought they were weak, well, you're going to have to explain that to your player that is now making death saves. Totally not speaking from experience here. The D6 is a heterahedron, or a cube if you want to be colloquial. There is a 16.6 recurring % chance of rolling any of its 6 sides, and the average result is 3.5. These are the normie dice, the muggle dice. They're used in many other board games, war games, and dice games. Everyone knows what these are immediately, and as such they don't get much attention from brand new players. Apart from that, they are basically little cubic bricks that can form the most solid of foundations for any dice tower that you may find yourself more interested in creating when the alternative is being present for the 3rd consecutive session your party has lovingly devoted to shopping. In-game, however, D6s are some of the most widely used dice. They are used to determine the pitiful health pools and hit die for sorcerers and wizards. They are also used as damage dice for scimitars, short swords, maces, quarterstaffs, javelins, spears, greatswords, short bows, and hand crossbows. Monks also use a d6 as the starting point for their unarmed strikes and monk weapons, which is kind of scary. Some notable spells that use d6s are Fireball, Scorching Ray, Hunter's Mark and Hex, Hunger of Hadar, and Meteor Swarm, which uses an absurd amount of these box-shaped polyhedrals. Sneak Attack is probably the most well-known feature that lets you roll d6s, and if you wanted to, you could make a rogue, use a short sword or scimitar, get access to True Strike, and then only ever roll d6s for damage. An interesting and weirdly thematic build that says a prayer to the sacred boxcars before every encounter. Finally, d6s are the fall damage dice. For every 10 feet your gravity beholden character falls, the DM gets to roll one of these beauties. Taking even a single point of damage here automatically knocks you prone. For this alone, d6s deserve a bit of respect. An octahedron is the best polyhedral shape. It has 8 sides after all, and 8 is the best number. D8's for the D8 throne, am I right? Anyway, rolling a D8 has a 12.5% chance of landing on any given face, and the average is 4.5. I like these dice the most because they won't betray you, or at least they don't feel like they will. When you roll a D8, getting an 8 feels amazing, but rolling a 1 or 2 isn't so far away from the peak that you feel truly bad when it happens. This is something that is a problem with some of the bigger dice. This is also the first size of dice that actually starts packing a serious punch in game and doesn't need a bunch of them to be thrown at once to get that effect. Now, D8s are vaguely diamond-shaped, but if you weren't aware, diamonds come in all shapes and sizes, and we've been fed propaganda regarding the true nature of polyhedral objects since our ages could be accurately displayed by the roll of a D4. So yeah, D8s are actually cut diamond-shaped. In D&D, D8s are used to determine the highest number of classes hit dice. Artificers, bards, clerics, druids, monks, and rogues all use these perfect little prisms. For weapons, we have the longsword, rapier, warhammer, battle axe, flail, morningstar, warpick, trident, great club, light crossbow, and longbow all dealing 1d8 damage. There is also a trend of cantrips that deal d8s as damage, from weapon cantrips like Booming Blade to saving throw based options like Sacred Flame, and even ones that require attack rolls like Shocking Grasp. For popular spells, we have Chromatic Orb, Divine Smite, Cone of Cold, and Cure Wounds. Finally, a spell that I've mentioned that uses dice to move hit points in the opposite direction. Then, clerics and druids have a special connection to the humble d8, especially if they are built to be martially inclined. Clerics have their Blessed Strikes feature, which lets them choose to do additional damage with cantrips or deal an extra d8 once per turn with an attack with a weapon. Druid's Elemental Fury feature has the exact same effect. And much like the rogue can be built to deal only d6s, the cleric can be built to deal and heal only d8s if you are vibing that way. Alright, let's move on to something a bit more swingy. D10s are decahedrons and have 10 sides. They are oddly spinning top shaped, but for the life of me I can't personally make them spin on one of their points. Anyway, there is unsurprisingly a 10% chance to roll each possible result, and the rolled average is 5.5. Now, from this point onward, the dice swing wildly, and the results feel less and less predictable. I've personally been betrayed a few too many times by damage rolled with a d10, even on one particular occasion where I managed to roll 2 consecutive ones for a critical hit. So yeah, I don't have a great relationship with this one. However, I will just mention that most sets of tabletop dice contain 7 different offerings, and 2 of them are d10s. But only one of them has units and the other has 10s on its faces. The second one here is used in combination with the regular d10 as percentile dice, but we'll get there soon. D10s are known for being the hit dice representative of the true martial classes such as the fighter, paladin, and ranger. The weapons that use d10s for their damage dice are the glaive, halberd, lance, pike, heavy crossbow, pistol, and of course all versatile weapons when wielded in 2 hands, except the quarterstaff and spear, which only use a d8 when Zweihanded. There are a few notable spells that use d10s like Firebolt, Eldritch Blast, Moonbeam, Insect Plague, and Firestorm. These spells can be particularly scary, and usually things get serious when d10s are rolled. But just like with my little story, there is a downside because 1s and 2s exist and come up more than you'd like, and generally more than I'm comfortable with. Now, despite the very clear exacerbation of the swingy problem posed by the d10, I somehow don't mind it as much when rolling dodecahedrons. 12-sided dice have an 8.3 recurring percent chance of rolling each face, and the average roll is 6.5, which is pretty high. When rolling d12s, you are gambling a lot more than with the smaller dice, and it really feels like it. I understand that rolling any dice is gambling and leaving things up to chance, but I don't know how to describe it differently. D12s just seem to have crazy highs and lows. You're going to roll 1s and 2s and they really feel like they pop up more often. Either that or you're just going to roll 11s or 12s. There is no in between, and usually you actively choose to roll these dice, so you're locked in and specifically there for that unique experience. Or maybe that's just my warped view on the dodecahedron. Anyway, barbarians use d12s for their hit dice. And if you play one, then you should really bug your DM into using the homebrew rule that lets you re-roll ones when rolling hit points for leveling up. Because if you don't, you're going to have some feels bad moments. There are only two people openers that use a d12 as their damage dice, and they are terrifying. Those being the Great Axe and, if you're inclined to mess about with gunpowder, the musket. Yes, when your character rolls damage for d12s, you are guaranteed some worthless low rolls at some point. But when it's the DM rolling for a monster or NPC, who in this case is absolutely a jacked unit that has a stat block to match, they always seem to roll hotter than the surface of the sun. But yeah, spells like Toll the Dead when the target is missing any hit points, Witch Bolt, which isn't awful now, and Conjure Celestials use d12s. Bards, Monks, Battle Masters, and two of the psionic subclasses, the Psi Warrior and Soul Knife, all have specific features that allow them to roll dice in certain situations. These dice all scale up to the d12, and at that point they feel powerful in ways that other character options just don't, even if the outcome isn't super reflective of the size of the dice most of the time, as we've established. Right, we've finally made it to the main event, the d20. These 20-sided polyhedrals are scientifically called icosahedrons, and they swing like no other dice can. Rolling one of these averages in a 10.5, and of course there is a 5% chance of any result. D20s are most closely associated with Dungeons & Dragons, as D&D is a D20-based system after all. This means that while all the other dice exist and are important, the D20 is the big dog that dictates the flow of the game. I'll say it again though, D20s are exceptionally swingy, and if you roll them for long enough, you're going to see all kinds of results bouncing back and forth. So, what do they do in D&D? Well, not damage. But they generally get rolled more than any other dice. Maybe not in huge batches, but definitely in volume of individual rolls. Yep, the d20 is king, or queen, or in some cases, god. You see, the d20 gets rolled when an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw is called for. These even got grouped together and labeled as d20 tests in the 2024 Player's Handbook. Other dice almost never even get a chance to be rolled until a d20 has been rolled, except for magic missiles, fall damage, and an incredibly limited list of features and scenarios. While other dice dictate the flow of damage, healing, and minor bonuses, d20s dictate the state of entire campaigns. It's very rare that any other dice roll dictates the fate of a group of adventurers. Not so for the d20, and it's awesome. There is another mechanic that is almost specific to the d20, apart from a few features like Savage Attacker, that being rolling with advantage or disadvantage. This lets you roll 2 dice and choose either the higher or lower result depending on the condition. There is a rumor that this equates to a bonus of roughly plus or minus 5 to the average of 10.5, but this is not the case at all. It's much closer to a bonus of a little bit more than 3. However, focusing too much on the numbers and averages isn't exactly going to line up with your experience of rolling them in game. They just swing too hard, especially when rolling more than one. Lastly, for d20s, while it only really applies to attack rolls with the critical hit and critical miss mechanic, there is always the looming feeling of a 5% chance of glory or abject failure when rolling a d20. And that's kind of terrifying in my opinion. Finally, let's talk about the dice you have to go out of your way to get a chance to roll, the D100 or the percentile dice. As mentioned earlier, you get 2 D10s in a regular set of tabletop RPG dice. When rolled together, there are exactly 100 different combinations, hence the name percentile dice. However, you do actually get a literal D100 and it is called a hectahedron. I would advise against using them in a game of D&D though. They take an excruciatingly long time to stop rolling due to the number of faces. There are 2 prominent ways that D100s are used in D&D, as well as a third that was taken from us too soon. Rest in peace, divine intervention. But the wild magic table and the mishap table from the teleportation spell both require you to roll to determine a highly randomized effect. Yeah, D100s are usually relegated to rolling for results on tables, as well as being rolled for results on physical tables. It goes without saying that the options here are extremely varied and that it may take a few lifetimes as a DM to see every single result on the percentile dice in actual play. Alright, that was some oddly specific but kinda random information about dice in Dungeons and Dragons. They're just so damn tempting to collect and hoard. Anyway, if you've made it this far in the video, then you're a legend and I really appreciate you. One question this time. Dice Goblin or Dice Dragon? Which one are you? Personally, I'm at a Goblin level currently, but one day I will become a dragon and it will be glorious. Oh, and if D6s aren't the most numerous type of dice in your collection, excluding D20s maybe, well then you're a dice unicorn. It is what it is. But yeah, that'll do it for this one. Cheers.